Good morning. Emmanuel, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, thanks. Good morning. My name is John Mutua. I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs as a programs coordinator. And I would like to invite you to yet another webinar where we'll be unpacking and assessing the Roots Party Manifesto, dubbed the Freedom Manifesto. So I would just give a little bit of background. So firstly, just to introduce the Institute of Economic Affairs, we are a think tank and a research organization that promotes debate and dialogue on public policy issues. And our mission is obviously to educate the public. And in line with this mission, we've held a couple of webinars and taken the public civil society organizations through the different presidential manifestos. And so we are rounding this up with this is the fourth political party manifesto. So just to mention, the very first webinar was on the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Alliance Manifesto. That is the Inawezekana agenda, and we held this webinar on the 14th of June. This was followed up 3 weeks later, again, where we unpacked the Kenya Kwanza plan, the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, on the 8th of June. And obviously, we did this right after, a few days after the manifestos were launched by these respective coalitions and parties. Then on Tuesday of this week, we had a similar session and where we took you through our analysis of the Agano Party manifesto. And so we are rounding this up with today's and review of the Roots Party agenda manifesto. Now, what we will do, I have three of my colleagues who will be taking us through this analysis, and it's a three-part analysis. One thing just to note is that, as you can already see, especially for those who've interacted with these manifestos and those who've attended the three previous webinars that we've held, these manifestos are fashioned in different ways. So for instance, the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Alliance Manifesto was fashioned in terms of what they are calling the Azimio agendas, a couple of agendas or resolutions around different issues. Then the Kenya Kwanza had a slight structure. It actually had an implementation framework. Then the Agano Party Manifesto fashioned this in terms of aganos, 12 aganos, or in English, covenants or pledges. And then this Roots Party Manifesto is fashioned in terms of 10 commandments. So my colleagues will be taking us through an assessment of these commandments. So it will be a three-part analysis of these manifestos. And actually, even before I go to this, I was just reading something this morning about the suitability of manifestos, and maybe this is something that the public our participants can gauge based on the different manifestos that you may have interacted with. And they say there are different characteristics of manifestos in terms of the length and its readability. And so one of the reports that I was reading mentioned is that the suitability of manifestos is inversely related with its length. So for instance, what that means is that the longer the manifesto, that tends to reduce its suitability. And also the readability of these manifestos the lower the readability, obviously that also reduces its suitability. So this is just something to bear in mind. And obviously we will provide some kind of an comparative analysis to look at these different manifestos beyond just the content. But anyway, for today's session, we will have 3 of my colleagues taking us through an analysis of the Roots Party manifesto. And this will be done in three parts. So the first part, we'll have Emmanuel Wachendo, who is a program officer in the Trade and Development Program, and he will cover the first 5 commandments. Then thereafter, we'll have Deborah Ntamburi, who will take us through the last 5 commandments. And we are lucky we have an intern on board at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Kiara Muller from the University of Geneva, who will provide an external point of view. So in terms of just trying to spice it up and giving, she's an international studies student, so she'll provide that flavor in terms of what she thinks or her views as a foreigner, basically. So each of them will take about 15 minutes, and then of course thereafter we'll open it up for Q&A session, and that will take about an hour, and then of course we'll conclude. So to start us off, and something that we've done throughout our analysis of these manifestos is to check how well they are grounded in terms of understanding the role of government, constitutional powers, and the aspect of separation of powers. So this first part will basically provide our views in terms of whether the Roots Party manifesto presents, in the way they've fashioned their commandments, whether indeed they understand the role of government or the theory of government or not. And so I would like to invite Emmanuel, who will cover that, knocking off the manifesto in terms of the understanding of the theory of government, and obviously taking us through the first 5. And so as soon as he's done, the rest will follow. And again, we'll not interrupt this. So we'll allow the 3 presenters to complete their presentation and then open it up for Q&A. Thank you. Emmanuel?
Thank you, John. Now, the Roots Party and Wajakoya have economic ideas, or rather a policy platform that has electrified an electoral base, right? They're very popular, judging by many different metrics. What we can observe is that during times of different kinds of anxieties, citizens I could say simple solutions to complex problems or swift, decisive actions tend to be very popular. As we go through Wajakoya and the Roots Party platform, there are some specific and very simple tools that we'll be using to assess what it is that Wajakoya and his political party would like to do when they enter government. Now, we take and we think that any political party's platform is important. It's important as a signal of what that party intends to do. For example, the current administration has done much of what they said they would do. The standard gauge railway is just one example of a promise they made and they kept. And it's an example of the fact that manifestos or agendas or policy platforms do actually matter. Now, when assessing an incoming party, right, a contender to the political helm, we want to see whether that political party understands what the role of government is. We want to understand what their conceptualization of what the government should and can do, and how that lines up against what the current constitution is, and what that how that lines up against economic principles. On the economic side, economic theory tells us that there's a distinction between public and private goods, and that the job of the government is to provide public goods. In addition to this, there are specifications that the Constitution makes, for example, education and health, that the government is obliged to supply, right? They should supply services in education and services in healthcare. The other simple tool that we will use is to assess the opportunity cost. So that is to say that for everything that a government commits to do, then it must forego a commitment elsewhere. Now, the Roots Party is contender Wajakoya's political party, as many of us already know, and his manifesto, or his political platform, has been called the Freedom Manifesto, and it outlines 10 commitments that Wajakoya and his political party will make, and that they will seek to fulfill once they get into office. They have called their commitments commandments, and this gives us a flavor of their inspiration. But here at the Institute of Economic Affairs, we want to test this against both the constitutionality and the economic viability, or the economic implications of his proposals. So the first commitment, or the first commandment, as he would call it, is to legalize cannabis, right? He makes a claim about how his logic, or his reasoning as to why he thinks that it's a good idea to legalize marijuana, and what he intends to do once he has legalized marijuana. His first intention is that this plant, or the sales of this plant, may raise enough tax revenues to actually start to offset the onerous debt that the Republic of Kenya currently owes. Now, the first thing to note is that Wajakoya, right off the bat, the Roots Party, right off the bat, have actually sought to nip in the bud one of the anxieties that the Kenyan public is facing, right? One great economic anxiety of the day is the onerous debt. How do Kenyans feel that? Well, on the one hand, the information about the debt is commonplace, and people are also feeling the pinch in terms of the tax burden, because taxes need to be used to repay the debt. So the Roots Party does get points in terms of feeling the ground for what's going on and trying to propose a solution. Is a solution viable? I'll cite one statistic that the Roots Party has thrown out there. Right at the very launch of their manifesto, they talked about sales of marijuana actually exceeding 60-70% of Kenya's current GDP. Because the question that many people ask is that, is this economically viable? The first thing I would say is, look, if we think about this from an entrepreneur's perspective, and really respect the entrepreneur, if such an opportunity existed, if it was possible for entrepreneurs to make, excess of $50 billion, right, from marijuana, wouldn't they already have been pressing to do it? This, I use this as a litmus test because before we even get into trying to calculate what is the viability and trying to understand, look, how much acreage does the Kenyan landmass actually have, and then how much of that can we plant crops in, and then how much of that should we dedicate to the growth of marijuana, and then how much of that should we take away from growing other crops like, say, flowers or maize or what have you. That tells us that already there is something perhaps unrealistic about the number, right? The second thing is that the numbers, many different numbers have been thrown around, right? Talk about say an excess of $60 billion being raised from one single county alone. I think we could say that if this was so, perhaps entrepreneurs somewhere would have figured it out already. Perhaps it wouldn't have been up to a messianic figure to bring out such an insight to us. So we find that the Roots Party has big ambition, but ambition that's not met by nuance. Another point on nuance is that the crop from which, say, marijuana comes from has many different uses, and there is a lack of clarity about what exactly the Roots Party wants to do. Are they interested in hemp? Are they interested in the industrial crop fiber? Are they interested in medical uses of the plant? And we note that, yes, this has raised concerns in, maybe you could say, conservative circles, or those who have a cultural distaste for the plant. What I would say is, perhaps at the front line of the debate should be the scientists and the medical experts to tell us exactly what should the mechanism for the legalization of marijuana should look like. And finally, when we talk about when we ask ourselves whether the Roots Party actually what their concept of government is, well, we find that ultimately involving oneself in the private markets and in the free markets is something for the private sectors, for the entrepreneur, right? We propose, for example, that the Kenyan public sector should get out of managing Kenya Airways. Why? Because tax revenues raised, taxes paid by every Kenyan household should not, we believe, be redirected to the benefit of one specific sector. Because if Kenya Airways should benefit, then why not some SACCO, some transportation SACCO, or a specific county, etc. So we find that off the bat, there is a misunderstanding about what the government can and should do, and even the separation of powers between executive and the legislative branch, right? The second commitment is much like the first, snake farming. Wajakoya talks about he talks alternatively about farming snakes and obtaining snake venom, It's not absolutely clear whether the two should come together. And again, there is the idea of raising enough revenue to pay off the debt. It's true that we do have problems from snake bites, and people are actually being afflicted from it. So there is a problem with snake venom, with the supply of snake venom. But we might ask ourselves why this should be such a grand priority for our political platform. But perhaps his focus is paying the debt. But here again, the economics is faulty. Perhaps a different question might be, what should the government do to develop the anti-venom sector or pharmaceuticals in Kenya in general? And then from there, let the entrepreneurs figure out the problems, right? Entrepreneurship is not a role of government, or at least of astute government. Commitment 3, consumption of dog meat. First of all, there are Kenyan food and safety laws that are against the consumption of certain animals. This platform again falls a bit in the in the fantasy land area of policies. Why? Because it's just not conceivable that we could raise enough revenue to pay off the debt with dog meat. Okay, first of all, in all these 3 cases, as soon as you have a glut of supply in the market, prices fall. So you cannot draw a straight line of revenue collection, right? You cannot say if I collect X amount for Y amount, that relationship remains the same all the way up. The 4th commitment, to hang the corrupt. Now, people found guilty of corruption and stealing public resources will be sentenced to death by hanging. This is, on the surface, seems a very attractive platform, for the reason that many in the Kenyan public are concerned, to say the least, about the level of corruption in Kenya. But what he proposes is a rather simple solution for a complex problem. In the first place, it's not clear that raising the penalty for being caught alone will actually reduce the incidence of the corruption. But now, secondly, and even more profoundly, this is actually it's an alteration of the Constitution, judging by how he has spoken, right? About going as far as suspending the Constitution and taking the law into his own hands. It is unconstitutional. Commitment 5, to suspend the Constitution. Now, the Roots Party claims that they suspect the parts of the Constitution do not work and should be suspended, and that other countries work without a written constitution. Now, suspending the Constitution is a problematic proposition. It's another simple solution to a very complex, to the complex problems that Kenya faces. It is not clear that in 2010, Kenyans voted to install a democratic constitution, and they've chosen to solve their problems, to write their laws through a democratic legislature, to vote, to elect who enters office through, an electoral process that gives the individual franchise to vote. And it's not clear that this is the way to solve the problem, because it's not a guarantee that you would get, many do dream of a benevolent dictator as a solution to Kenya's problems, but the track record of so-called benevolent dictators is not very strong. That is all I will say for that. And I will now invite my colleague, Deborah, to continue with the next 5 Roots Party policy commitments.
Okay, thank you. So on the 6th commandment, next slide, please. Thank you. The 6th one is shutting down. They propose to shut down the standard gauge railway. They claim that the SGR equates to colonization and that we can build our own railway systems with our own money. So our comments on this is that, first of all, we should ameliorate the street and not rebuild them. Plus, the traffic will be worse because people will now find other ways of transport, which the most affordable one on the Mombasa-Nairobi way is the road system. So this will cause more traffic. And also we should ask ourselves, what about the sunk cost of this? Because already a lot of resources have already been used in the construction of the SGR. So will all those resources go to waste when it is shut down? Yeah. And then on the 7th one, Emmanuel, thank you. That we'll have a 4-day work week. They claim that Friday, Saturday, and Sunday will be weekends, and this will be left to be days for worship. So already labor is part of a commercial contract between an employer and an employee. So a government making this rule for a 4-day work week, it will be an interference of what the contract between those two parties have already agreed, because some have already agreed to work 5 days, others 6 days. So it will be an interference. Plus, this is inefficient because already Kenya has high rates of unemployment. So reducing the days of working by 1 day, it will for sure increase unemployment. Plus, this claim, it assumes that Kenya has a bigger formal wage sector, of which this is not true, because the labor sector is divided into 3, agriculture, manufacturing, and services. And for Kenya, 2/3 of the working population belong to the agriculture, and it's more of an informal sector, since some people will go to the farms 7 days a week. So telling them to work 4 days a week and not go to the farm, it's not viable for such an informal wage sector as Kenya. Yeah. And then the 8th one is to move Kenya's capital city from Nairobi to Isiolo due to the geographic centrality in the country, and also since it has an international airport. So this is a fallacy of capital city being at the center of the country, because already Nairobi has more population. This gives it more specialization. So since there is division of labor, you'll find people who are specialized in food delivery, others are specialized in transport, in different sectors. So moving it to Isiolo, it will take time for people to move to Isiolo for that specialization to be realized. And there have been examples for countries which have moved So far, the most successful has been the Brazilian one, but since it's been long term because they moved it in 1960, those are 62 years. And currently it has the highest GDP per capita than any other Latin American city. But let's look at our neighboring country here, Tanzania. They moved theirs from Dar es Salaam to Dodoma in 1970. It has been slow paced. It has not reached the same development as Dar es Salaam, since it's only the National Assembly which has moved to Dodoma, but other foreign embassies and government offices are still in Dar es Salaam. So that doesn't show 100% success in moving a capital city, especially for a developing country. Yeah. And in the next slide, you can see the distribution of the population density in Kenya. As you can see, around the cities, Mombasa, Nairobi, and the western side, that's where more people are located per kilometer squared. Yeah, so and Isiolo is somewhere there where it's between 50 to 100 people per kilometer square. So it's not densely populated so far. The ninth commandment is that they will create 8 states. So they claim that they'll introduce 8 regional states with each with a federal government. And they claim that this will give every community power to make their own decisions. So first of all, this will require a constitutional change. And plus, them making claims that it will give every community power to make their own decisions. This is more viable for 47. 47 is more granular for a community to be able to make their own decisions compared to making it into larger sections of just 8. Plus, when the constitution was being made, the Kenyans voted for 47 compared to the 8 that was there before. And on their last commandment is that all idle foreigners will be deported. So they claim that foreigners have taken jobs that Kenyans do, and the Kenyans first claim, and that baseless foreigners will be deported in the first 100 days. In our comments, this is a fallacy of Kenyanization, that Kenyans should be the only ones given opportunities to work in Kenya and not the foreigners. Plus, being idle isn't a crime. And then when they say they will deport foreigners, they will have to plan for enforcement costs. Because will this now mean that it will encourage more foreigners to come and be idle, knowing well that the Kenyan government will deport them after a while? So it will impose more costs for the country. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Perfect. Okay, thank you, John, for the presentation. So my name is Chiara. I have the huge honor of being here as an intern, and I'm usually studying in Geneva as an international relations student. So I wanted to make an intervention mainly because I would like to create a space for discussion that goes beyond examples strictly within Kenya and maybe give you a new interpretation or perspective on some points. So I come from Switzerland, where parties rely heavily on splits, for example, linguistic, age, money, geographical splits, and so on, others. For example, I vote for a party called the Greens because they focus on avoiding climate change and do initiatives that touch the youth. So that touched me personally. So in Kenya, what I found is a very different way of attracting voters. Obviously, you have your roots in tradition and in the division of your tribes. So there are parts of the plans that particularly are aimed at specific groups, and we can realize that especially in this manifesto. As my colleagues have perfectly explained, this party aims to touch a bit of the desperation of Kenyans who have lost a lot during the last COVID period or frustrated of what is going on with the politics and are ready for this extreme measures. This party blames it all on the politics we could call by staying within the rules. While instead, this party offers the innovative and for some tempting possibility of stepping outside those rules and conventions. So the proposal that most attracted voters is obviously the one of the marijuana legalization. Although the proposal still seems uncertain given the continuing difference between the plans and his different purposes, is it good to talk about it? And we're here to provide a platform for this kind of discussions. For example, in America, we have seen legalizing marijuana has brought benefits, huge tax revenues. Companies are free to list their stocks on all exchanges, so enhancing liquidity and opening up access to many more investors. And also, if marijuana were removed from the list of controlled substances, far fewer court cases involving the substance would go to trial. There will be less people looking for marijuana, resulting in more money saved. But we have an example closer to your home. Countries here in Africa where decriminalization exists, different than legalization. But for example, the Constitutional Court of South Africa decriminalized the possession, growing, and usage of weed by the adults in private in 2018. So, however, buying, selling, and usage of weed outside private space is still prohibited. Medical cannabis products are prescribed by for any health conditions, but they have to be obviously authorized by health practitioners who are licensed by the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. So obviously there are still concerns, for example, about increased homelessness or youth use of the substance, the potential for decreased property value, and much more. Some are opposed to changing the regulatory status of marijuana simply because it means a change of the status quo that marijuana represents. In Kenya, major efforts to push for some sort of legalization have been met with still resistance centered on religion, negative public perception, etc. So, but again, the proposal is still unclear, but this is a discussion it is important to have. So what indeed shocked me was the proposal of farming snakes and another proposal of exporting the dog meat. If those are great proposals, again, the question, why hasn't everyone thought about it? So there are different ideas met by different experts. For example, that trading the products can diminish the population of the species, which can lead to extinction. Probably it's caused to harm also to animals. And there's also a light possibility to another zoonotic pandemic like COVID that may arise if Kenyans start interfacing with those animals. But maybe those are just excuses for others to not bet in those markets. So another pretty worrisome claim is the hanging of the corrupt that will diminish corruption. So the sky-high levels of corruption in Kenya are angering, obviously. But for the parliament, and again, the parliament, not the government, the parliament, to make corruption a capital crime will breach Kenya's obligation under international human rights law. What I'm talking about is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which Kenya became a party in 1972, permits countries that have not abolished the death penalty to use the punishment only for the most serious crimes, which involve death penalty, which involves intentional killing. Corruption is not part of those most serious crimes. So imposing the death penalty on the scourge of corruption is a knee-jerk reaction to appear tough on crime. And the recourse to death penalty is in reality just a symptom of failure in the governance. So next to the suspension of the Constitution as a matter of legal theory, like Emmanuel already explained, within a republic, a constitution is the ultimate legal command. So what he talks about is an uncodified constitution, a constitution made up of rules that are found from various documents without having a full constitution. And we have some examples that the party used as reference. So Canada and the UK have their constitution divided in those conventions and documents. Saudi Arabia has those written as religious basis. But what do you have? That constitution was a major change, those of 2010. Would you be able to rechange it and reprogram everything you've built until now? Next is the working for 4 days. Absolutely a great idea, good efficiency, but in places like Switzerland. Like also Deborah explained, in Kenya, prominent part in agriculture, who will listen to this? People here respond to necessity, not to time. So this is not really realistic. And it will work, again, in places like the UK, where the party leader has been for a long time. The creation of 8 states and the moving of the capital. The creation of 8 states, again, goes against the idea of having a strong constitution, because, for example, Switzerland, that is a federal country, there are divisions, cultural, linguistic, and geographical, but the politics brings them together. For a federal country to work, the constitution has to be strong. And especially if they want to make it more transparent and less granulated, as explained, it would be useful to have a strong constitution. So which one of the two? The last one, that is the one that probably touches me the most, is the foreigners. So I may be judged as an idle foreigner, even though not all foreigners are white. And I see this just as absolutely aggressive and would just bring a lot of anger. So in conclusion, this party brings many new proposals. Many of those are interesting. Some are quite dangerous. We should be careful to tell the difference. So based on past experience and also on the assumption that many people would want to avoid sinking a boat that is marching at a good pace, it is realistic to expect that Kenya and its economy will be able to absorb any looming electoral shocks. So if there is a shock, it is be hoped that it will be neither too violent nor too long. Thank you.
Wow, thanks a lot to Emmanuel, Deborah, and of course Kiela, for taking us through or trying to basically unpack the Roots Party manifesto. Actually the conclusion is quite I think set and succinct. And just to mention, in the 10 commandments, some of the common threads or things that we see, for instance, given the claims or commitments that have been made by the party, of course, Emmanuel has explained how some of those claims raise the question of viability, economic viability. For instance, in terms of what would be generated from legalization of marijuana, notwithstanding what the laws, the current laws, and what would be required in terms of putting together institutional, legislative, regulatory framework. At the same time, we've seen that, of course, some of these claims and commitments would become very good candidates for educating the public on what we call economic fallacies. Of course, there are certain claims, popular claims, that are held by your general public, the media, the politicians, and so on. And often some of those claims are not backed by economic theory. Already we can see here some proposals that are candidates for these claims. And at the Institute of Economic Affairs, we actually have a handbook of, I think, 51, 52 economic fallacies, and we've actually touched on some of these. And so that has already also been explained well by Deborah, the aspect of moving capital cities, the issue of Kenyanization, and so on and so forth. And then obviously the conclusion that we've gotten from Kiara is that the positive from this manifesto is the fact that it has it provides some kind of an entry point to discussion of some difficult things like the repugnant market against the morals, the culture, and the politics in the country. And here, what we are referring to is just the aspect of legalization of bang, as well as the farming of snakes and so on. So, in a way, this shock effect, unlike, of course, the other political party manifestos, what this manifesto does is basically provide that entry point for some discussion into some difficult things that are seen as taboo. So thanks a lot to our three presenters. So I would like now to open it up for any questions or comments or observations from our participants. So feel free to unmute or raise your hand, as I'll be going through the chat box to see whether there are any queries that have been posted. So we'd like to invite our participants to pose their questions. So I see Victor. Victor's hand is up. Victor, please unmute yourself and pose your question, and then you can mention who you would like to direct it to.
Thank you very much, John. I don't know whether you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. This is really not a question, but maybe, okay, it could be a question. Is that, first of all, I think I want to commend you guys for, holding these webinars in just trying to unbundle what has been captured in these manifestos. I think it's a really important thing for the audience to understand what's going on among all these political entities that are coming up with programs that are aligned or are perceived to be aligned to what the people need. Now, I wanted to ask, at any given point, have you guys thought about, consolidating the key points from each manifesto just to see whether there's some level of similarities on the issues, and just to compare? I know this has been a good platform for us to look into it. I apologize, this is the first one I'm attending, so maybe this is something you may have looked into before, but is there a possibility for us to be able to see some sort of a matrix on areas of similarities among all these manifestos and where there's some disparities in that? But number two, when I looked at, of course, the team has done a good job in just trying to enlighten us in what has been provided for in this manifesto. And personally, when I looked into this document, then I realized that, I'm sorry to say this, but I think the institution of presidency is an institution that must be, taken with a little bit of some seriousness. I think, personally, having read these points that have been listed in this manifesto, number one, there's nothing to do with with the transition, because some of these proposals are extremely radical. And remember, we're implementing a new constitution. I would have assumed that the drafters of the document would come up with an implementation plan. How do we transition? Because you need some level of theory of change and some sort of enlightening the citizens more, and moving from day one to the fifth year on how you're going to be transitioning from the current economic model that the country might be implementing into these radical proposals. I haven't seen that. I wish they would have captured that so that they kind of be able to influence our thoughts. But number two is that there's one thing that I saw there in terms of deporting foreigners. This is an element of a coin with two faces, because the moment you deport foreigners, you could call them idle. I don't know how you would be able to identify idle foreigners, but you see, it also has implication on Kenyans who are staying in other parts of the world. So I don't know whether they may have thought about the foreign policy perspective on how this might have an implication on the Kenyans who live abroad. But number two is that, or rather number three is that I didn't see anything to do with the Kenyan value system. Of course, the manifesto talks about dealing with corruption and hanging people and so forth and so on, but they haven't gone into the root cause of what brings corruption. And I think my biggest thinking is that mainly corruption in this country is caused by the fact that we have allowed civil servants and people in government to transact business with the government. And I would have assumed that, in providing a solution, they should have looked at the root cause and see how to seal it even before going into capital punishment. That is something that I haven't seen there. The other thing is about moving of the capital city. I know this is possible because what we could do is to do administrative movement. You make sure that even the government offices can be moved from the capital to the other places to ease congestion and so forth. And I think the presenter had talked about the process and the framework that would be instituted to enable that. I definitely agree. So such a manifesto should have had an implementation plan, or not even but a transition implementation plan on how we are going to be able to effect all these things, because the proposals are radical, issues around marijuana, issues around, I think, snakes and dog meat and so forth, because ideally you should be saying we have identified a market, and although even if we haven't identified a market, this is what we are thinking. These are the potential markets, and these are the instruments that would need us to be able to export such. Because even if you talk about marijuana, Kenya has been exporting tea and coffee for the longest time, and we are still not able to get that much of revenue from it to be able to offset even our debt, as the manifesto perceives to make a comment on. So the biggest thing, the biggest miss in this manifesto for me is element of lack of a transition plan on how this would be implemented, and how to identify the root cause of some of these challenges that we are facing. And so with those root causes, and they're able to come up with strategies, like he is already providing solutions, but not telling us how these solutions are related to a particular problem. But as I conclude, I think I want to commend your team for doing what you have done so far, and I'm hoping that at the end of it, we might be able to have a comprehensive document, just does a comparative analysis of all the manifestos that you have looked into. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Victor, for some of the comments and observations that you made. Of course, I will invite my colleagues to make whatever additional responses that they may have. But let's see whether we have somebody else. So we'll have a first round and then open it up for another round.
Can I go?
Is that Davis? Davis here.
Yes, this is Davis here.
Okay, go ahead, Davis.
Thank you. Mine is a simple question. I think as an institute, I would wish to hear a verdict on the economic viability of the whole marijuana proposal, looking at the Kenyan context and assuming there was a framework, a legal framework to implement, would the proposal be a solution that would, you know, bring some relief to what we are facing as a country? Of course, that would require looking at the global market, whether it can be saturated, and all that. So removing the legalese is whatever Roots Party saying, making economic sense, assuming it was legal. Thank you.
Thanks, Davis. Let's see. Do we have any other? Can do a third one, then I will allow Mumo. Mumo, you can go right ahead.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to maybe more about the market.
Yes. Background noise.
Hello, can you hear me now? Hello.
Yes, not very clear, but maybe to get your, there seems to be a lot of background noise.
Okay, two questions. And one of them is about the global market. The bank, also the sustainable chapter. This particular they provide us like the demand that is low, because they should not maybe say an area where the country ventures. Only when the country ventures this kind.
Mumo, do you mind writing them on posting your question on the chat box, because it's not very clear. We cannot hear you well. Yes, Mumo, please. Post your question on the chat box. Okay. So Emmanuel, so there is a question posed by Davis.
Right.
Yes, I hope you've captured that. And any other comment that you'd like to make regarding the observations that have been made by Victor. And then, of course, I would also like to invite Deborah and Kiara to choose whatever else to add to those observations. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So starting off with David's question about the viability of marijuana, I believe he was not asking just about the viability of marijuana, but the viability of marijuana as a source of tax revenue to repay our debts and actually make the load lighter. Maybe the first thing before we even look at maybe the mathematics of it, which we could probably sit down and do, if marijuana was a viable pathway to being debt-free, maybe someone else would have already been doing it right now. If marijuana had some qualities that were so special that allowed it to be, a wonderful debt repayment scheme, maybe the Japanese with their 200% debt to GDP ratio would have beaten Kenya to the punch. Maybe the Americans would have been doing the same. Maybe our neighbors, Tanzania, would have also figured that, hey, maybe we should pay off our debt by selling marijuana. The point of what I'm saying is that that wealth, we need wealth in order to repay debt. You need to be generating wealth, right? And so in order to do that, you try to sell the most valuable products that you can, or maybe to put it even more precisely, the state that is presiding over a strong, wide-based, diverse, and very complex economy can better afford to accrue large debts, because it knows that, say, if you're talking about Japan, they can tax the Toyotas and the Sonys and the Hitachis and all other industries that and services in very high value sectors in order to generate the funds to repay the debts that they've borrowed. Because ultimately we're trying to ask a debt sustainability question from the state's perspective, right? The astute state looks around and figures, okay, how much can we actually borrow, right? Now, for the state to propose that it should get into the private sector and not just the private sector, but to get into some niche product, because the development of that niche product by the state will allow the state to repay the debt, is, it can sound good, when you use a product like marijuana, but it's not, it's just not viable. Yes, it's not viable, and it's probably not going to happen. And again, when you also consider how much land Kenya, arable land that Kenya has, and then how much of it is already being used to develop other crops. So how much of it would you, again, why should the state use taxpayer money to get into one specific sector of the economy? And furthermore, a sector that, I mean, it's just not going to work. And then there were comments made by another of our guests about
by Victor.
Yes, by Victor, about the Kenyan value system. I'm not sure if he elaborated enough on that for comment. Is there a level of similarity between the platforms? Are there differences? Okay, so if we look for the similarities and differences, what are the glaring differences, right? Number one, we're at a point in Kenya's economic story that is fraught with anxiety, and people have good reason to be anxious. And when we are anxious, we have a tendency to seek for simple solutions. So one difference between the platforms is that Roots Party is proposing much simpler solutions than Azimio and the Kenya Kwanza camps. They're not. It's very light on economic theory. It's very light on constitutionality. In fact, it just goes against many principles of those two fields of thought. Now, how the Roots Party's platform is a bit dangerous and also backward looking, because it proposes that they seem, by judging by their proposals, they believe that the state can solve every problem that Kenya faces. This is dangerous. And where is it walking us towards? It's walking towards a type of fascism, right? Fascism is about the state being the be-all, end-all. The state has solutions, right? And that if only the state was strong enough, if only you gave me enough power as the executive, we would be able to solve all these problems. But these are the arguments that were made by people like Pol Pot, or individuals even like Mao Zedong, or the Stalins, or the and it's not to say that yes, you see, this perennial search for a benevolent dictator is a bit misguided, because it's not it is dangerous. Now, when we talk about freedoms, when we listen to the Roots Party, they have some they have been speaking about some of the plights faced by individuals. Now, there was an example that Wajakoya himself gave of a child who who could not afford to pay school fees because his mother's business in informal brew was shut down by the police, right? Now, again, 65% of the women in Kenyan jails are actually in jail on informal brew related offenses. What is informal brew? It's simply, if you drive up to Thika Road and you see the Kenya Breweries Limited factory, and you take that and you kind of squish it down a little bit, and put it in a kitchen, right? That's essentially what these women do. But for many reasons, the Kenyan political system has decided that these kind of businesses are unacceptable and untenable, but the others are not. So Wajakoya is correct to point out, for example, that this is that Kenya has, although he doesn't say this for this specific case, and these are my own words, pointing out the informal brew situation, but he does point to an injustice in the system. But then at the same time, he talks about the state and seems to want to have an empowered state security or a system that would allow him to just decide, these people are guilty, decide which laws are not working and which ones are. Yeah, but then now if we compare that to Azimio and UDA, UDA platform has also proposals about anti-corruption proposals. Azimio seems to be a bit light on that, judging from their policy platform specifically, right? And so that's on the corruption front. And I think, to answer your question, we do intend to actually continue and to compile and talk about some of the differences. But in closing, the idea of unraveling Kenyans' hard-won political, human, and economic freedoms, because that's what actually Roots Party's proposals kind of amount to, in a sense. Give him more power and to do things, because we need a strong person to set things right. It's the most dangerous in that sense of the three. Yeah, and I think that's what I would say for now.
Yeah, thanks, Emmanuel. Deborah, do you have any?
Yeah, it's still on the question, the comment by Victor. Thank you. On the request for having a consolidated analysis, we are actually waiting for one more, Kagame's manifesto, so that we can now merge the 5 analysis. So it will be coming up soon. And yeah, thank you for the rest of the comments on the transition implementation plan. Those are some things that we will add on the comment of the consolidated analysis of the manifestos. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Kiara, any additions?
Yes, just lastly, I wanted to thank Victor for bringing up the idle again, the idle foreigners. Yeah, obviously, speaking of idle foreigners, I absolutely agree that they do not have a precise definition of idle, no proposal on how to implement it. This is how about all Kenyans, let's say outside of Kenya, specialists who help in specific areas, the tourists that bring money, and the students like me that come here to study and to learn. And these are, which one of those people are absolutely idle foreigners? This we don't know. They did not absolutely explain it. And on the same side, there's just a lack of precise implementation on a lot of their sides. Obviously, you managed to talk about the constitution part. That is one of the most important of this proposal. Without a precise intervention of how they would implement a new constitution, this all just breaks down into something pretty aggressive and just sometimes a bit absurd. I wanted to end my intervention like this. Thank you so much for the question and absolutely interesting interventions.
Yeah, thanks, Kiara, Manuel, and Deborah. So Kasimu has posted his questions, and his first question is similar to what Davis had posed. And the straight answer to this is the Institute of Economic Affairs has not done any specific study around just understanding the market or the economics of cannabis. Of course, we've interacted with a few blog pieces, articles, literature here and there. And our CEO Kwame has posted a few of those that you can also interact with just for further education around this. But yeah, we haven't done anything specifically in terms of analyzing the global market statistics, projections, etc. Of course, the stuff that you come across, for instance, I think I see one of those blog pieces in terms of economics of marijuana is talking about why legalized cannabis hasn't become the booming industry some have expected. So I think there are articles here and there talking about whether indeed for those that have legalized are in this market, whether that has met the expectations or not. So yeah, so I guess you can interact with these two and any other that you come across. And I guess your second point is basically an observation that has also been clearly articulated by our presenters. So I would like to invite our participants again for the final round of queries, if there are any. Feel free to raise your hand and mute yourself, or even post your query on the chat box. In the meantime, Emmanuel, Deborah, and Kiara, you can prepare your closing remarks. Okay, so I don't see any new comments or questions in the chat box, and I want to check what time we are. I think we're almost. Okay, so Kwame's hand is up. Yeah, Kwame, please go ahead.
All right. Thanks, John. My connection is weak, so I'll keep the camera off for the time being. So let me say things, I think, because two questions have come up that we need to deal with. So the first thing is the understanding of the cannabis or marijuana business requires us to separate two things. One of them is, and I think it's true that this manifesto that we're speaking about did not distinguish that, and I think it's created confusion. So marijuana use and its derivatives from the cannabis sativa plant goes into two channels. One is the recreational use, and the recreational use option is very widely available. In fact, one of the things that you see in Kenya every so often, the police impound people transporting the marijuana plants in various forms of processing for the purposes of recreational use. The second, that I think the one that maybe should be have more attention, is the derivatives of the cannabis sativa plant has several industrial uses, from fiber in the form of hemp all the way to pharmaceutical use. And by pharmaceutical, I mean pain management use. So basically it can be extracted by a pharmaceutical farm, value added, and that has been used for pain management, even for very serious medical conditions such as fractures, people who suffer fractures, trauma, and even for people who actually pain management for cancer patients. So there's legitimate use. I think the absence of detail, which this team has spoken about today, to distinguish whether it's legalization for the purposes of recreational use or legalization for the purposes of pharmaceutical extraction, is what we have not discussed. So the second point is, I think that for good or bad, this Roots Party have opened an opportunity for Kenyans to actually discuss these things. And the function of policy is usually to go into detail. I am not too sure to what extent any Kenyan who's looking for recreational uses for marijuana would be unable to find it, given the prices that the police have quoted. It's actually very, very cheap, in some cases even cheaper than tobacco. So if it is that available, then maybe the consequences of enforcement and what the benefits of that enforcement is, I think, is a question we need to bring to the fore. Finally, the one country with the most developed data, and some of the data that I put here suggests that US states, there are 33 states in the US who by the year 2020 had legalized marijuana use for recreational purposes, but in some cases it's just basically for medical uses, which would require a prescription from a doctor. So the regulation work that needs to be done to make, quote unquote, drugs or marijuana prohibition policy in Kenya be reversed actually requires a lot of work, all the way from the economics of it to the medical science and bringing it all up. But it suggests that in that year, all the states in the US collected $20 billion worth of taxes from people who grow, who were given licenses for the purposes of cultivation. And those licenses have to be given on the basis of very controlled conditions. So this is a question of detail. So yes, it's true, we shouldn't necessarily dismiss it, but I think the press have perhaps been irresponsible, because the only uses of marijuana that we in Kenya understand is the extraction of the cannabis sativa plant for recreational purposes. And I'm sure that if it's for recreational purposes alone, there may not be as much money to be made in the form of taxation as perhaps could be if an industrial component were extracted. And so those two are completely different things. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, Kwame, for those quick insights on the economics of marijuana, and in particular the fact that this manifesto lacks details on where the focus should be, whether it's medical vis-a-vis industrial, and I mean it's inclined to industrial, but basically it lacks details, and you've provided some insights on regarding that. Yeah. Okay, so I do not see any query and the chat box, neither do I see any other hand up. So then at this point, I would like to see. So I'd like to invite my colleagues, starting with Kiara, then we move on to Deborah, and then Emmanuel can make your final remarks.
Yes, thank you, John, for the introduction. Thank you, Kwame, for the last points. I just wanted to say I'm really, really grateful and honored to be able to express myself here on this platform too. And again, thank you again for these insights on Kenya, and I hope I can continue giving my insights and taking back everything I can. Thank you so much to everyone that assisted.
Thanks, Kiara. Deborah?
Mine is to thank you all for attending, and the comments and the questions, they were all significant. Yeah.
Emmanuel?
Yes, thank you so much to the guests for attending. I think in closing, there's some sense around some corners that the Roots Party is serious and shouldn't be taken seriously. I think just by putting up this webinar, we indicated that we think contrary. No, Roots Party should be taken seriously. The proposals should be read. We should all go and have a look at what commitments they're making, and we should ask ourselves what it means. For example, that first of all, the legalization of marijuana. This is a conversation that they have started in Kenya, and that we're now trying to frame. They have not made clear what iteration of this plant that they want to legalize and for what use. Just highlighting how the very rough way that they have started the conversation. That they've also are pushing the conversation about the public debt, which is an important conversation to continue to have in a sustained way, and to hold our those who we elect to office to account for what they do, and finally for their very, very radical proposals to change the political and potentially social character of Kenya. So thank you very much for attending, and we hope to continue these conversations as we go on.
Okay, thanks a lot to the three presenters, Emmanuel, Deborah, and Kiara, and also help me to thank our participants for setting aside their time, their morning session to join us in this webinar. So we're also very grateful for some of the comments, questions, and observations that you've made. And as was noted by both Deborah and Emmanuel, yes, indeed, we will conclude all these webinars. We've analyzed the individual political party manifestos. So we'll have a write-up that provides a comparative analysis that looks at obviously whether there are similarities, differences, peculiarities, and so on. And providing that synthesis across all the four, or indeed maybe the five political party manifestos, as we wait for the verdict on Ruben Kigame's running. So please look out for that. Of course, we will using, of course, our social media pages and our website. We will let you know about this. Again, just to mention, the Institute of Economic Affairs is a membership organization, and so we would like to invite you to be a member of the IEA, and you can get those details from our website, whether you're a student, a professional, or even a corporate organization. You are welcome to join to be a member of the IEA. The obvious various benefits that come with it. The first one being obviously just that ability to interact and share with us in terms of the different research products that we generate. So otherwise, thanks a lot again to all our participants. And at this point, I would like to close the webinar. So have a good afternoon. Thank you. Yeah, bye-bye.